The NFIB Small Business Optimism Index for last month fell to its lowest level since July of last year. Now, earlier on Squawk Box, Bill Dunkelberg, chief economist with the NFIB, talked about why he thinks this problem won't go away.
It's going to take customers coming in the store and spending money, and that really isn't happening, at least on Main Street. So we might be seeing it in the big chain stores and so on, but it's not filtered down to the service sector.
So what's a bigger problem? A lack of customers, i.e. demand, or a lack of supply, as in credit for those small businesses? Lloyd Chapman is president and founder of the American Small Business League. Clifford Shore is professor of entrepreneurship at Columbia Business School. Good to have both of you with us. Lloyd, Bill there gave a pretty direct comment there that the problem is people still don't want to buy a lot of stuff that small businesses are selling. It's not necessarily that small businesses can't get credit at the banks.
Well, I think he's right. You have to realize 90% of all U.S. firms have less than 20 employees, and the surveys show that their number one problem is not an access to capital, but it's customers walking the door, it's orders, it's sales, and that's really the one thing the government has not addressed. So we spent $3 trillion to stimulate the economy, increase access to capital, but the real problem is small businesses, their sales are down, they're laying people off, and the federal government is not addressing the fact that we're not directing enough federal infrastructure spending to small businesses. That's really the only thing that's going to make a difference, I think.
Well, Professor Shore, it sounds like what the federal government's been doing repeatedly is trying to make loans more available to small businesses. But from this perspective, it looks like perhaps they are not treating the real injury.
Well, I think that's really true. I think one of the biggest problems is they don't seem to recognize that it's small business that drives the future of the economy. I mean, if you just look back over the last few decades, it's so obvious that all of the great companies that were produced, from the Apples, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Facebooks, all of that had access to capital. And these are the things that have employed people in this country. These are the drivers that, in fact, have built our economy and made it possible for people to become customers and go in the stores. So I think this is America's greatest problem in the sense of understanding the need to feed capital to the small business community, and they're not doing it effectively.
I just want to point out that Professor Shore has been an entrepreneur before he became a professor, has started a number of businesses, and so has real-world experience. You don't think that this is a credit problem more than anything else, right?
Well, I think it's partially a credit problem. I think it's also a lack of understanding of the government. We poured a lot of money into the banks, and financial institutions did great bailouts, but what I didn't see that they were forcing some of that money to be targeted to the growth sectors that we should be focusing on. We should be pouring money into small business, developing new energy technologies, energy efficiency. We should be looking at those things that have a global impact. And I don't think we've been doing that effectively at all.
Why not effectively? Because every other week, or literally every week, we get an announcement about that very thing, about green innovation and money going to green technologies from the White House.
Well, we certainly get a lot of announcements about it, but I'm not so sure from the small businesses that I see and that we're working with that money is really being channeled effectively to them. There's a lot of red tape in the normal bureaucratic process, and right now we need to prime that pump very, very quickly. I mean, just look at our unemployment rates. They say that, something like 44% of the people that are unemployed have been out of work for 6 months. Let's get that money into small business where, as it was just mentioned, the people are really hired.
Lloyd, I was interested in reading your notes to discover that the Small Business Administration is actually smaller now than it was under President Reagan.
That's right. There's 27 million small businesses in America. They employ 56% of the population, and they create 100% of the net new jobs. And yet the SBA's budget now is less than it was when Ronald Reagan was president. So I think one of the solutions to trying to stimulate the economy and create jobs is to probably quadruple the SBA budget so they can implement the federal programs that have been in place. There's actually a multitude of really great programs that, if they were properly implemented, would create jobs and stimulate the economy. But the SBA's budget is so small. And again, the SBA Inspector General has said for 5 consecutive years that the number one problem at the SBA is the fact that Fortune 500 firms are getting all the money that by law should be going to the middle class. So, that needs to be addressed. There's also a bill in Congress called the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act, H.R. 2568, that's been written to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to large businesses and redirect about $100 billion a year into the middle class, that piece of legislation would do more to stimulate the economy and create jobs than anything that President Obama has proposed. It's H.R. 2568, the Fairness and Transparency Contracting Act.
And that attempts to get more federal infrastructure work to smaller businesses, correct?
Yeah, I think any economist will tell you that if you want to create jobs and stimulate the economy, we need to take existing federal infrastructure spending and give it to small businesses because, again, 56%
Are they big enough?
of the population...
Let me just interrupt for a moment. Federal projects can be pretty big. Can small businesses handle that kind of work?
Yes. In fact, I'll tell you something. Large businesses haven't created one net new job since 1977. So when you look at federal infrastructure spending, I think it's important to realize that huge volumes of federal infrastructure spending, both for contracts and subcontracts, are in amounts of less than $2,000 and $3,000. So you don't need to build bridges and roads to stimulate the economy. You can buy, office supplies and computers and things like that. Mm-hmm. But a huge amount of federal spending is in very, very small amounts. People don't understand that, and that should all be directed to small businesses. 100% of it should go to small businesses, and there's no reason not to do that. So that's the only thing that President Obama and Congress have failed to do, which is redirect this infrastructure spending back to the small businesses where 100% of jobs are created.
All right, thanks very much.
Appreciate your input, gentlemen.